All my life, my only job was to be a mother. After one final betrayal, I decided it was time to retire from that role for good. This is my story of reclaiming my own life after decades of thankless sacrifice. My dear, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where are you watching me from. It is very, very important to me. And now, on to my heroic story. My name is Martha, and for the past 30 years, I've been a ghost. Not the spooky, chain-rattling kind, but a much quieter, more common type of ghost. The mother whose own life vanishes to make room for the lives of her children. My world revolved around my son, David, and my daughter, Elisa. Their needs were my needs. Their dreams were my dreams. Their emergencies were my emergencies. I was the fixer, the endless well of love, money, and support, the soft place for them to land. And in return, they called me selfish, an egoist. That was the word my daughter, Lisa, threw at me last Tuesday, just before she broke the final piece of my heart. I had forgiven them for everything, the missed birthdays, the condescending tone, the constant requests for money they never paid back. But what they did last Tuesday, that wasn't just another act of casual ingratitude. That was the final straw. And if you knew the secret plan I've put into motion since that day, the new life I'm about to build for myself, you'd understand that my children are about to discover what it really means when Mama decides she's finally done putting herself last. This isn't a story about them anymore. It's about me. It started, as it always did, with a crisis. David, my 35-year-old son, a man with a master's degree and the financial planning skills of a teenager, had gotten himself into debt again. This time it was serious. A business investment in a friend's guaranteed win app had gone belly up, and he was on the verge of losing his apartment. He came to me, his face a mask of practiced despair, a look I knew all too well. "I don't know what to do, Mom," he'd sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm ruined." I did what I always did. I reassured him. I looked at my own modest savings, the money I had carefully put aside for my own retirement from my job as a school administrator, and I started calculating. My daughter Lisa, 32, a successful but perpetually dissatisfied real estate agent, was no help. "He needs to learn to stand on his own 2 feet, Mom," she'd said over the phone, her voice dripping with judgment, even as she herself had accepted a hefty down payment from me for her own condo just last year. The unforgivable thing wasn't that David needed money again. It was how they decided to get it. My late husband, Robert, had been a passionate, if not particularly famous, jazz musician. His one prized possession was his vintage 1959 saxophone, a beautiful, rare instrument he had played in clubs all over the city. It was my most cherished connection to him, a sacred object that lived in a velvet-lined case in my closet. It was worth a lot of money, I knew, but to me, it was priceless. They knew what it meant to me. Last Tuesday, they came over together, a united front of concern. They sat me down at my own kitchen table. "Mom," Lisa began, her voice sickeningly sweet, "we found a solution for David's problem, a way for him to clear his debts and get a fresh start. We're gonna sell Dad's saxophone," David announced, not looking at me. I just stared at them. The air left my lungs. "No," I whispered. "Absolutely not. Anything but that. It's your father." "It's just a thing, Mom," Lisa said, her voice turning sharp. "A thing sitting in a closet collecting dust. It's worth a lot of money, enough to solve David's problems. It's the logical thing to do. Your father's legacy is not a thing to be sold to pay for your brother's bad decisions.
I said, my voice rising. See, Lisa said, turning to David with a triumphant smirk. I told you she'd be like this. It's not about Dad's legacy. It's about her controlling us, controlling the money. She's always been selfish like that. Selfish. The word hit me like a physical blow. Me, who had sacrificed every vacation, every luxury, every personal dream for them. Selfish. How dare you? I began, but David cut me off. Lisa's right, Mom, he said, his voice cold. You're being emotional. It's just an instrument. It's our best option. We're doing it. And then I realized they weren't asking for my permission. They were informing me of their decision. They had already had it appraised. They had already found a buyer. They were there to take it. I stood up, my body trembling with a rage I hadn't felt in years. I will not touch that saxophone, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You will not desecrate your father's memory for your own convenience. Get out of my house, both of you. Lisa rolled her eyes. Oh, here we go, the drama queen. She stood up and walked towards my bedroom. Where is it, Mom? Let's not make this ugly. I moved to block her way, but David stepped in front of me. Just let her get it, Mom, he said, his voice tired. It's for the best. He, my son, was physically blocking me, holding me back while his sister went into my private space to steal the last, most precious piece of his father I had left. That was the moment I broke. That was the unforgivable thing. It wasn't just about the saxophone anymore. It was about the utter, callous disregard for me, for my feelings, for their father, for our entire family history. They saw me not as their mother, but as a dragon guarding a treasure they felt entitled to. After Lisa emerged from the bedroom carrying the heavy case, a triumphant glint in her eye, I just looked at them, the two children I had given my life to, and I felt nothing. The love had been burned away, replaced by a cold, clear void. They left without another word, and as the door closed behind them, I stood in the silence of my home and made a decision, a final one. They thought I was selfish? Fine. It was time I finally learned how. It was time I finally did something for myself. And my first selfish act would be to ensure they never got another single thing from me ever again.
The silence that followed their departure was different from any silence I had ever known. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of an empty house after a long day, nor the heavy, grief-stricken silence after my Robert passed. This was a ringing, absolute silence, the sound of a door slamming shut on a 35-year-long chapter of my life. I stood in the middle of my living room, the empty space in the closet where the saxophone case used to be a gaping wound, and I did not cry. The tears, I realized, had finally run dry. In their place was a cold, unfamiliar, and utterly liberating resolve. They thought I was selfish. Fine. It was time to live up to the accusation. My first act of selfishness took place the very next morning. For years, I had managed my retirement savings with one eye on my own future and the other, larger eye on my children's next emergency. I walked into my bank, sat down with a financial advisor, and for the first time, I spoke only about myself, my goals, my dreams. I want to restructure my portfolio, I said, my voice clear and firm. I want to move the bulk of my assets into a secure, irrevocable trust with a single, sole beneficiary upon my death. Of course, Mrs. Miller, the young man said kindly. Your children, David and Lisa, I presume. A slow, cold smile touched my lips. No, I said, the local animal shelter. The advisor's eyebrows shot up, but he, a professional, quickly masked his surprise. We spent the next 2 hours moving funds, signing documents, building a financial fortress around my future that my children's grasping hands could never breach. Walking out of that bank, I felt lighter than I had in decades. The ghost of their endless expectations had finally been exorcised. My second selfish act was even more delicious. For years, I dreamed of seeing the great national parks of the American West. I'd see pictures in magazines, the grand silent majesty of the Grand Canyon, the impossible blue of Crater Lake, the towering forests of Yosemite. Robert and I had always planned to go one day, but one day never came. There was always a tuition payment for Lisa, a down payment for David's car, a new business venture that needed funding. That afternoon, I sat at my computer, and with a few clicks of the mouse, I did something I had never done before. I booked a 2-month, fully guided luxury tour of the national parks. First-class train tickets, comfortable lodges, everything. It was wildly, gloriously expensive. It was an investment in the only person whose future I was now responsible for. Me. Of course, the backlash was not long in coming. About a week later, Lisa called, her voice sharp with accusation. "Mom, David told me what you did," she began. No pleasantries, no greeting. "And now, David tried to get that small loan from you, the one you promised, and your account is different. What have you done, Mom? Are you having some kind of breakdown? David is on the verge of losing his apartment." "Is he now?" I said, my voice as calm as a placid lake. "That sounds like a problem for David to solve." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. What did you say?" I repeated slowly, savoring each word, "that your brother's financial situation is his own responsibility, just as your mortgage is yours and my retirement is mine. The bank of Mom, my dear, is permanently closed." "You can't be serious," she shrieked. "You're being selfish. After everything we've been through, you're just going to abandon your own son? The way you both abandon your father's memory for a quick buck?" I retorted. The ice in my voice made her pause. "Yes, something like that. I'm simply taking a page out of my children's book. It's called Putting Myself First. You should try it sometime. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go pack. I'm leaving for a 2-month trip to see the national parks next week." I hung up before she could respond. The sound of her sputtering indignation, the sweetest music I had heard in a long time. My trip was a revelation. I stood at the edge of the Grand Canyon and felt my own problems shrink to insignificance in the face of its vast, silent majesty. I saw geysers erupt in Yellowstone, their power a mirror of the long-suppressed energy I was finally unleashing in my own life. I walked among the giant sequoias in Yosemite, ancient beings that had stood for centuries, and felt a sense of timeless peace. I met people, other travelers, retirees like myself, young couples, families. I talked, I laughed, I shared meals. For the first time, I was just Martha, a woman seeing her own country, not David and Lisa's mom, the eternal fixer and ATM. I was becoming a person again. But my children were not done with me yet. While I was in a beautiful lodge in Zion National Park, I received a formal-looking email. It was from a lawyer, their lawyer. They were formally contesting my decision to place my assets in a trust. They were suggesting I had been unduly influenced or was not of sound mind when I made the decision, and they were threatening legal action to have the trust dissolved and to have one of them appointed as my financial guardian for my own protection. The audacity of it, the sheer unmitigated gall, was breathtaking. They thought I was selfish for wanting to keep my own money. Now they were trying to have me declared legally insane to get their hands on it. My journey of self-discovery had just turned into a new kind of war. And I knew, with a certainty that was as solid as the red rock canyon surrounding me, that I was ready to fight. I read the email from my children's lawyer twice, sitting on the porch of a beautiful stone lodge overlooking the majestic peaks of Zion National Park. The sheer, breathtaking beauty of my surroundings was a stark, almost cruel contrast to the ugly greed contained in that digital message. They were really going to do it. They were going to try to paint their own mother as insane, all for a chance to get their hands on money they hadn't earned and a life they hadn't respected. A bitter laugh escaped my lips, startling a nearby blue jay. Oh, my darlings, you have no idea who you're dealing with anymore. My trip was no longer just a journey of self-discovery. It was now a gathering of evidence. Evidence of my vitality, my clarity of mind, my absolute competence. I didn't cancel my tour. I embraced it. I documented everything. I took photos of myself hiking the Narrows, my face beaming with exertion and joy. I wrote long, detailed journal entries about the geology of Bryce Canyon, the history of the Anasazi people. I made friends with a group of retired teachers from Wisconsin, and we had lively, intelligent debates about politics and literature every evening. I was more alive, more engaged, more mentally sharp than I had been in 30 years. Let them try to prove I was incompetent. I was building a mountain of evidence to the contrary. My first phone call was not to my children, but to a lawyer. I didn't need a referral from a friend. I, Martha Miller, retired school administrator, knew how to do research. I spent an entire afternoon in the lodge's library, not looking at travel guides, but at the websites of the top elder law attorneys in my home state. I found her, a woman named Sarah Chen, with a reputation as a tiger who specialized in fighting financial elder abuse. I called her office right there from Zion National Park. I laid out the entire situation for her, from the saxophone to the email from my children's lawyer. Her reaction was not surprise, but a weary, righteous anger. "Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice crisp and professional, "this is a sadly common story. It's called inheritance impatience. Your children's actions are despicable, and their legal claim is tenuous, but we must take it seriously. They will try to use your grief, your age, and your love for them against you." "They already have," I said grimly. "Then it's our job to show the court that you are not a victim, but a vibrant, competent woman who is exercising her right to live her own life," Miss Chen stated. "And I have a few ideas on how to do that." I returned from my 2-month trip a new woman. I was tanned, fit, and armed with a top-tier lawyer and a spine of steel. I moved into a new, smaller apartment downtown, a place I chose for myself, and began to build my new life. The legal threats from David and Lisa continued, but now they were filtered through Miss Chen, who handled them with dismissive efficiency. The hearing for their petition to establish a conservatorship over me was set. They were going to stand up in court and try to prove their own mother was crazy. I knew I needed to make a move, a public one, that would not only bring me joy, but would also serve as an undeniable testament to my sound mind and my clear long-term financial planning. And so, I did the second, selfish thing my children would never have anticipated. The local community arts center, a place that had given so much to the city's children but was perpetually struggling for funds, was about to lose its lease. I had read about their plight in the paper. I called my Chen, then the center's director. A week later, the local newspaper ran a front-page story. The headline read, "Local Retiree Saves Community Arts Center with Landmark Donation." The article detailed how a private citizen and lifelong supporter of the arts, Mrs. Martha Miller, had established an irrevocable trust, the Robert Miller Memorial Fund for the Arts,
to purchase the building for the center and provide it with a permanent endowment, ensuring its future for generations to come. The article included a photo of me, smiling, handing a ceremonial check to the overjoyed director. I spoke in the article not of my children, but of my late husband's love for music and my belief in the power of community. The checkmate was quiet, elegant, and public. How could my children argue in court that I was mentally incompetent to handle my own finances when I had just made a major, celebrated, and legally impeccable philanthropic gift to the city? How could they claim I was a selfish egoist when I had just used my money to save a beloved community institution? Their legal case, already flimsy, was now in tatters. They had been outmaneuvered. The phone call from Lisa that night was not a shriek, but a low, venomous hiss. "You did that just to spite us," she whispered, her voice trembling with fury. "No, dear," I said calmly, looking out my new apartment window at the glittering city lights. "I did it for the city's children. I did it for your father's memory. And yes, I suppose I did it for me. I'm finding I quite enjoy doing things for myself these days. You should try it sometime." I hung up before she could respond. The game wasn't over, but the board had completely been rearranged, and I was now the queen.
The day of the conservatorship hearing felt like the final exam for a course I never wanted to take. The subject? The anatomy of a family's downfall. I walked into the courthouse, not with the fear of a victim, but with the quiet, steely calm of a woman who had already passed the test. I had spent the last few months not just traveling, but living, breathing, thinking for myself. Whatever my children and their lawyer threw at me today, I was ready. David and Lisa were already there, huddled with their attorney, a man who looked increasingly stressed. They sat on the opposite side of the courtroom. They wouldn't look at me. They looked like petulant children who had been caught with their hands in the cookie jar and were now trying to blame the jar for being there. The sight of them didn't fill me with rage anymore, just a profound, weary sadness. How had we come to this? Their lawyer went first. He tried his best, bless his greedy little heart. He painted a picture of a grieving widow who was not acting in her own best interests. He called my trip across the country a flight from reality. He described my decision to establish the Robert Miller Memorial Fund for the Arts as a reckless and emotionally driven act of financial imprudence. He suggested that I was being manipulated by new opportunistic advisors, meaning my lawyer, Miss Chen, and that my children, in their deep and abiding love, only wanted to step in to protect me from myself. It was a masterful performance of fiction. Miss Chen listened patiently, a small, almost imperceptible smile on her face. When it was her turn, she didn't come out swinging. She was calm, methodical, surgical. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Martha Miller, is here today because her children disagree with her life choices. They are not used to her making choices that prioritize her own happiness and legacy over their immediate financial desires. This is not a matter of incompetence. It is a matter of ingratitude." She then proceeded to build a fortress of evidence around me. She presented my detailed travel journals filled with my lucid, intelligent observations. She presented my correspondence with the board of the Arts Center, letters that were clear, articulate, and businesslike. She even had a sworn affidavit from the director of the Arts Center praising my vision, clarity, and generous spirit. The final piece of her presentation was a psychological evaluation from a respected, court-appointed psychiatrist I agreed to see. The report was unequivocal. It described me as highly intelligent, articulate, and possessing a profound understanding of her financial and personal affairs. It concluded by stating that my recent life changes were not a sign of a breakdown, but rather a post-traumatic growth and a healthy, assertive reclaiming of personal autonomy. I saw my children shrink in their seats as Miss Chen read that last line. Their entire case had just been dismantled, not with opinion, but with cold, hard professional fact. The judge, a thoughtful woman with kind eyes, then turned to me. "Mrs. Miller, do you have anything you would like to say?" I stood up, my hands gripping the edge of the podium only slightly. I looked not at the judge, but at my children. For 35 years, my primary identity was mother. Every decision I made, every dollar I saved, every dream I deferred was for David and Lisa, and I did it out of love. I have no regrets about the sacrifices I made. I regret only that my love was taken not as a gift, but as an entitlement. I paused, letting the words hang in the silent courtroom. When my husband died, I was lost. And when my children, in my moment of grief, chose to take the last precious memory of their father from me for their own selfish needs, they did more than just break my heart. They broke the spell. They woke me up. The woman who traveled the country, the woman who established a foundation in her husband's name, that is not a confused, incompetent woman, Your Honor. That is the woman I was always meant to be, had I not spent a lifetime putting everyone else first. My children call me selfish? You know what? They're right. I am finally being selfish. Selfish enough to want to live the rest of my own life with dignity, purpose, and peace. And I will not apologize for that. I sat down. The silence in the room was absolute. The judge looked at David and Lisa, her expression of profound disappointment. She said, "A petition for conservatorship is a serious matter meant to protect the truly vulnerable. It is not a tool to be used to settle family disputes over money or to punish a parent for making life choices you disagree with. The evidence of your mother's competence is overwhelming. The evidence of your own questionable motives, however, is deeply troubling." She banged her gavel, the sound sharp and final. "This petition is denied with prejudice. And I would advise you both," she added, her eyes locking onto theirs, "to take a long, hard look at your own behavior. Court is adjourned." It was over. A total, unequivocal victory. David and Lisa scurried out of the courtroom, their faces pale with humiliation, refusing to look at me. The war was won. I felt a wave of relief, but it was a hollow victory, tainted by the sadness of what had been irrevocably broken. I had won my freedom, but I had lost my children. As Miss Chin and I walked out into the bright afternoon sun, she put a comforting hand on my arm. "You were magnificent." "I was just a mother who had enough," I said quietly. And I was. I had enough of being taken for granted, enough of being a ghost in my own life. I was going to live on my own terms. The cost had been immense, but as I walked away from that courthouse, I felt, for the first time, truly, completely, my own person.
The judge's gavel didn't just mark the end of a legal hearing, it marked the end of an entire era of my life. The era of Martha the mother, the eternal giver, the fixer, the ever-present safety net. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt a strange lightness, as if a 50-pound weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted from my shoulders. The sadness for my children was still there, a dull, deep ache, but it was no longer my defining feature. My defining feature, I decided, was going to be me. I throw myself into my new life with the focus of a woman who had been starved for decades. My trip out west had been an appetizer. Now I was ready for the main course. The new downtown apartment became my sanctuary, a space that reflected me and me alone. There were no dusty sports trophies on my shelves, no piles of my son's old comic books in the closet. Instead, there were books I wanted to read, art I wanted to look at, and a beautiful, comfortable silence that I filled with the sound of my favorite jazz music. The Robert Miller Memorial Fund for the Arts became my passion. I wasn't just a silent benefactor, I became an active board member. I attended meetings, helped review grant applications from struggling young artists, and found a profound joy in seeing my late husband's legacy and the money he had worked so hard for used to create beauty and opportunity rather than to patch up the self-inflicted wounds of my entitled children. I met fascinating people, artists, musicians, community leaders. My world, once shrunk to the size of my children's latest crisis, expanded exponentially. I continued to travel. I went to Italy and saw the art I had only ever seen in books. I went to Scotland and walked the misty highlands. I learned that I was good at being alone, that my own company was interesting, that my own thoughts were worth listening to. I was no longer a ghost in my own life. I was the main character. And what of David and Lisa? The court's ruling and my subsequent complete silence was a shock to their system from which they could not easily recover. Stripped of their ability to challenge me legally, and more importantly, emotionally, they were forced for the first time in their adult lives to confront the consequences of their own actions. I heard about it, of course, through the quiet reports of my sister, who couldn't help but keep me informed. David's apartment, which he could no longer afford without my subsidies, was lost. He had to take a second, menial job to pay off the debts he'd accrued. Lisa's perfect suburban life, built on a foundation of my financial gifts, began to show cracks. Her frustration and resentment now turned on her husband and her own life choices. They tried to reach me, of course. At first, there were angry voicemails accusing me of cruelty, of abandoning them. I deleted them without listening to the end. Then came the pleading messages, full of, "I'm sorry, Mom, let's just talk." But their apologies were always conditional, always tinged with the underlying assumption that my role was to forgive and forget, to open my wallet and my heart once more. The final test came about a year after the court hearing. It was a letter from David. It was different from the others. It was short, and there was no request for money. "Mom," it read, "I understand now. I think I finally understand. I spent my whole life blaming you for my own failures, taking your love for granted because it was always there. I never saw you as a person, only as a resource. That's a terrible thing for a son to admit, but it's the truth. The saxophone, it was just a thing, but it was the thing that finally showed me the monster I had become. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I see you now, and I am sorry for everything." I read the letter, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of the old love, but it was different now. It was a distant, sad love for the boy he had been, and a flicker of hope for the man he was, perhaps, finally trying to become. But it didn't change anything. Forgiveness wasn't a switch I could flip. The damage was too deep, the trust too broken. My healing had depended on creating a boundary, and that boundary, for my own peace, had to remain. I did not write back. My life now is full. It is quiet, but is not empty. It is filled with art, with music, with new friends, with the satisfaction of my work with the foundation. I have found what I was looking for, myself, the woman who had been buried under decades of thankless sacrifice. My children called me selfish when I finally chose to save myself, and I have learned to embrace that word. Selfish. It is the most beautiful, liberating word I know. It is the sound of my own name, spoken in my own voice, in a life that is, finally, completely mine.